Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day in Nashville. It's supposed to be really hot, I think, starting this weekend. Somebody said yesterday that by Monday or Tuesday, it's going to be 95 degrees really late in the evening. So I don't know. But we had a little reprieve. It was nice to have it nice and comfortable for a while. But get ready. I think it's coming back. Our guests today are Lucy Kemp, who is the Executive Director of the Planning Department for Metro Government, and Anna Greider. I almost misspelled it. Anna Greider, who is the Project Manager for the East Bank, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But before we start, a couple of things. One is I know that Judge Amanda McClendon is on today. Welcome, Judge McClendon, and I'm sure we'll have some other people hop on at some point. I know we got a lot of questions, and I hope Lucy and Anna spend a lot of time looking at them, because some of them I don't fully understand. So we're just going to turn you loose on this stuff. A couple of things for you. I just came from a breakfast by Pastor Fuzz in East Nashville, where I did see the mayor. A lot of emphasis at that meeting on getting vaccinated. And I know a lot of people on these calls have already been vaccinated, but I also know that you have access to other people who may not have been vaccinated. The scary part about all this is that the numbers are going up and the beds are starting to fill up. And I am very concerned. Obviously, the mayor spoke about it today. Judge Angie Dalton spoke about it today. We should all be concerned. Again, I think I saw yesterday where Vanderbilt is starting to lose capacity. I know other states are too. The highest number of people that are showing up in the hospitals that have serious COVID-related issues are those people who haven't been vaccinated. That was the whole point of this, was to get vaccinated early. Just be aware. This is, I will say, we've said this on the call before. Just because we felt good at the beginning of the summer and things started opening back up did not mean that the pandemic went anywhere. It didn't leave. It was right there, and it's starting to rear its ugly head again. So be very, very careful, and just be safe. We want everybody to be careful. All right. Having said all that, a lot of stuff going on this weekend in Nashville. Lucy, Anna, I'll start. I usually start with some non-relevant question, and then I'll go to both of you to ask more relevant questions. But are either one of you driving in the Grand Prix this weekend? And you're both muted, so I can't hear either.
Yeah, I have a little tractor trailer I'm going to take with the planning department logo on the back. Okay. You know, commissioners, rain, and it's great. And I'm really fast. 5 miles an hour. Good luck with that.
Good luck with that, particularly in that left turn that's around close to your offices. That I don't know how they do that. It's I thought Grand Prix you just ride around as fast as you can. Apparently, there's a turn over near Peabody Street where you go up, and it's a 90-degree angle left turn. We'll see what happens. All right. So Anna, are you racing in this?
I feel like I have been, because that's the way I drive to the office every day. So I've been pretending going over KVB with those barriers that I'm a little bit in the Grand Prix. Obviously obeying all speed limit laws, but it felt very professional. So yeah, I've enjoyed the track.
I thought there are no speed limits on this race. You just go as fast as you can. The whole idea was to win it. I know
that's my one thing. What I noticed when I moved to Nashville is that speeding is like the speed limits are a mere suggestion in a lot of areas. It's like, let's just haul, but people are really nice about it. You stop, everybody looks at each other at the stop signs, and then it's like haul. So it's very interesting. There's a thing here.
Yeah, haven't you seen at the bottom of the speed limits it says suggested speed? Did you not ever know that? Yeah. All right, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Lucy Kemp, Anna Greider are here. We're going to talk about the East River and the projects that are going on down there. But the first question that I always ask all my guests is, tell us a little bit about yourself. And so, Lucy, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Anna, because I know more about you, Lucy. Anna, I'm going to dig in with a lot of questions. So I think she needs to look some of that stuff up before I get to her. Lucy, where are you from? Where were you born? And how did you get to this illustrious position where you help plan everything that's going on in Nashville?
So first, Vice Mayor, thank you so much for having Anna and me on with you this morning. And for the folks who are listening, I'm really excited to talk about our work along the water in Nashville. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is a much smaller river town, but it is also a river town. And when I was a surly teenager in Little Rock and couldn't get excited by much, Little Rock started to reinvent its waterfront. And I remember at the time not really having a name for being a city planner, but I was so excited by what was going on downtown in Little Rock that I think that's the root of, my interest in planning. I went east to school and stayed in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. for some years after going to school at Virginia. And so about 4 years ago in 2016, my husband and I started to talk about, where we wanted to raise our family. But for me professionally, I was really excited to go to a city that was growing, that had some important planning questions before it. And Nashville, I think, is really distinguishing itself as a city that has a lot of problems that require creative problem solving, but also so many opportunities. It's such an extraordinary city. And so 2016, we landed here with 2 kids, and I've been privileged to serve in this role for about 3 years, and it's really the honor of a lifetime.
So let me ask you a question, which is interesting, because I hadn't thought about this before. You all just moved here in 2016. So you moved here to a city that is basically exploding. I go downtown. I was traveling around. I actually got to take a tour of the Grand Prix tour of the racetrack the other day. And I looked back and I was sitting next to Kevin Crumbo, who's the Metro finance director. And I looked back and I pointed to a building and I said, "What is that?" It's next to the Pinnacle building. I think it's the Four Seasons Hotel. I think that's what it is. But I don't, things are popping out of the ground all the time. So here you come in, you move into Nashville, and not only do you have to figure out where your office is, because you have never lived here before, but you have to figure out a lot of the distinct natures of the area. I always considered Nashville a lot of small towns that were kind of put together into one big city, because there's distinct neighborhoods, but we somehow all flow together. But you've got a city with a lot of unique history, a lot of unique characters to its neighborhoods, and a city that is just expanding. How do you learn all that stuff that quickly so you can try to address some of these questions?
Well, when I first started, the Planning Commission, which is, composed of so many outstanding volunteers and people who love this community, gave a lot of advice about how to do that work. And essentially, I went on a listening tour, and that listening tour lasted for about 6 months. And truthfully, it continues today. I learned everything from going out to Bellevue and looking at those hillsides, that those hillsides were named. Don't ask me what they are right now because they're not in front of me.
Yes, ma'am.
They need to be named things that are more memorable. To learning about the history of the heart of downtown, the Great Flood of 2010, learning about the impacts there. So I think you're right. You can't just read a book, although I did that. You have to talk to people. But, Vice Mayor, I love the description you just gave, because I think part of my role is to enhance those features that are character defining features of our city, and to uncover those and then protect the things that are under threat. And that's the moment that we're in right now. And you could kind of distill that into a few characteristics. But to me, one of the things that's so interesting about Nashville, if you look at it in plan, it's designed in a very dreamy way. You've got your state house on a hill, you've got your river, your park green in front of it, your downtown situated on a river, and then it's surrounded by these lovely sort of small villages, if you will. And those villages are growing, but it's all situated in a landscape green. And so you kind of start with that principle that from, Bellevue to Whites Creek to Green Hills, you have all of these distinct neighborhood areas and clusters where people can get together and be part of a community. But I think that, to your point, some of those principles are, are really challenged right now. They've been challenged in COVID. They've been challenged by the growth. And so we have to every day do what we can to protect and enhance those and improve the quality of life for people. So I love your description of kind of imagining this county.
Well,
and it's different, by the way, from Charlotte, from Atlanta, from certainly the northeastern cities that are older. This city is really distinct in all of those ways we just described it.
Okay, so let me try to figure out the best way to respond to that. So it's people didn't want to become another Atlanta. And I don't think, when I drive into Atlanta, every time I get in Atlanta, I think Atlanta is like 8,000 miles long because there's buildings everywhere. So I don't ever get the feel when I come into Nashville that we're like Atlanta. But I do think we have a lot more compact downtown maybe than Atlanta does. At least that's what I feel like. It feels like the growth has been there. But how do you handle in your role, people going like, we got too much stuff going downtown, you've forgotten about the Southeast or the Bellevue area or whatever. What about us? And then how do you, as development grows, how do you protect those areas to make sure that we just don't have people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but maybe I do, but outside developers coming in and going, you know what, we're going to tell your neighborhood what it's going to look like in the next 10 years because we know better. And people are going like, wait a minute, no, this is our neighborhood. This is where I grew up. This is what I remember. So we don't become something that we weren't. I know we're growing, but we're Nashville. We want to keep what was good about us. How do we hold on to that? And you're muted.
And I just solved all your questions during that moment of being muted.
So now
answered the
now
whole
we move on to Anna.
Well, so there's so much packed into that question. The question of loss, but also of opportunity for what we can be as we grow. Because as a city, we don't want to be stagnant, right? You do want to evolve. You want to respond to the needs of people as they change. And so, but I think you're right. One of the big sort of assets that I had coming into this role is that I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of work that has been done before me. And one example of that is that the city went through a major comprehensive planning process in 2015 with Nashville Next. I'm a planner, not a biologist. So planning is about responding to people and, not going into a laboratory by yourself and doing experiments. And so the people helped articulate Nashville Next and where we want to grow and what areas we want to protect. So I came in with a blueprint in place. It's imperfect. It's continuing to evolve and grow. It's a dynamic document. But I think that's a lot of cities don't have a governing document like that. We do. It's a huge asset. Downtown is a lifeblood of a city. It is more compact than I would say Atlanta. Atlanta has multiple major areas of density. But our approach downtown and in really focusing on how to create a rich quality of life there does mean that there are people who can live and work downtown, which is good for the rest of the county. That's not to suggest we shouldn't be investing in the rest of the county, because we should, with greenways, with schools, with neighborhood level services and maybe employment investment that's appropriate for that area. But planning is a living practice. And so you sort of, I would say you want a strong downtown You want a strong downtown that's vibrant and growing, but that doesn't have to be to the exclusion of investment elsewhere. And it's figuring out what that balance looks like. And I think that transit and a transit strategy, I'm so pleased that the mayor's office has a transportation plan that can help guide us in that future. That's really fundamental, because if we want to be a city of short distances where people can easily walk to their places of employment, their places of worship, visit with churches or schools or what have you, you've got to have kind of common and equitable access to those things, right? You could walk, bike, all of those things, give people those alternatives. And so having a strong downtown, I think, is actually part of a strategy that helps support neighborhoods even 20 miles away.
When you said short distances at this point, after the week I've had, my idea of a short distance is walking from where I'm sitting right now to the couch that is about 10 feet behind me, and then just lying down and just taking a break.
Vice Mayor, I can't plan for that. I mean, I don't know. I would love to plan for you to be able to get to that couch and
Can you not do
be
it?
happy.
Could we not have a trolley car drive by and pick me up? And
I feel like we could. We could just have a little plane and it could just lift you up and put you right where you want to be. A happy vice mayor is a happy city. That is worth our investment everywhere.
Okay, I'm going to put that down on a bumper sticker. All right, so I'm going to switch over to Anna now, because I don't know Anna as well. Anna, what are you doing here? And you're muted, so you have to unmute. Okay. Tell me where are you from and how did you get to Nashville?
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's nice to meet you virtually. Hopefully at some point in the future, we'll be meeting in person. But yes, I am from England. I grew up in Nottingham, which is in the middle of England, about 1 million people, right in the center of England. So I grew up in the heart of a big city.
So what is Nottingham? Isn't it? Is that where Robin Hood was from?
Exactly. Yes. Our tourism is based on Robin Hood. Yes. So yeah,
is
we
it
have
really?
Sherwood Forest.
I'm serious. Do people come to Nottingham for that? Okay. I didn't know there was.
We have a statue.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a statue of Robin Hood by our Nottingham Castle, which just went through a big renovation. Our streets are called like Maid Marian Way and things like that. So yes, we and actually Maid Marian Way is very controversial because it was kind of a ring road through the heart of the city. So it's a little ironic that they called it that because it is maybe not loved by those who care about Nottingham. So little sidebar. But you can go to Sherwood Forest. It's just outside the city and they have the very old oak tree that's held up by sticks and things. So yeah, if you're familiar with Robin Hood and the movies and things, then yeah, Nottingham has grasped that as a.
Does he have relatives there? I mean, are there whatever? I mean, are there people who claim that they're relatives of his that live in Nottingham?
Well, that's the thing. Like it's we don't know if he actually existed or if there was someone like him who, what was it, feared by the bad, loved by the good, that kind of redistributed wealth and things. So I don't know. I'm sure people do. I don't know. They might be crazy, but I don't claim any heritage to Robin Hood. But
okay,
it's a neat thing for the city to have.
Before I get to how you got here, if one person in particular wanted to go to Nottingham, do they fly into London and drive up? Is that the best way to do it, or they fly someplace else? How did they get there?
Yeah, when I go home, either London or Manchester, we're kind of in between those two. So usually London, but yeah, and you can get a train. You don't have to drive. You can just hop on the train and go. It's about 3 hours north of London. So I only ever went to London about 2 or 3 times growing up. It was a big deal to get to go to London. So,
all right, Lucy, have you been to Nottingham? Have you been there?
I have not. My brother-in-law is actually British, but he's from a different part of England. It's very, So no, I've not been there, but I'm inspired by this.
Okay,
moment right here to go.
So we're going to Nottingham. Okay, just telling you, I may go after.
Road trip.
All right. So Anna, so how did you get to Nashville? How did you get over here? And you're muted again. There you go.
So Yeah, and I'll give my parents a head up if you decide to go to Nottingham.
Okay,
So, so growing up, I had a best friend from Mississippi, which is very random that she would end up in Nottingham. And so the first time I came to America, I was 16. I flew over for a few weeks on my own to stay with her in Mississippi. So my first experience of the States was Columbus, Mississippi, which is a lot different than most people's first experience of the United States. But I was really intrigued by it. It was so different from where I grew up. And so when I went to college, I did a year. Well, before I went to college, I took a gap year, which is pretty common to do in Europe. And I lived in Vancouver, Canada for 6 months of that and traveled on the West Coast a lot and experienced Seattle and Portland and LA and a lot of West Coast cities. And then when I chose the college that I went to in England, the University of Sheffield, you could do, because our undergrad is only 3 years, you could do your middle year in America. So my first choice was UNC Chapel Hill, but I didn't get my first choice. I got the University of Oklahoma, which most people, when I told them I was going to Oklahoma, were like, what is that? Is that like a city or what is that? I was like, oh, it's a state, but yeah, you might not have heard of it. So I flew over to the University of Oklahoma, and funnily enough, my now husband picked me up at the airport. He had my name written on the state of Kentucky because he just ripped it out of his road map at that time when we used to have road maps in our cars. And he thought, I'm never going to go to Kentucky. So he just ripped it out and put my name on it and was holding it at Will Rogers World Airport in Oklahoma City. And so
did he know that he was going to marry you at the time? I don't fully understand how this happened.
I know, it's weird. He was with his best buddy.
Why did he pick you up? Why was he the one who picked you up?
I feel like this could take a lot of time. He volunteered with the international office at the University of Oklahoma because he had just spent 6 months in Sweden. Anyway, so he got scholarships with them and stuff. So he likes to drive, and there's not like tons of things to do in Oklahoma. So it seemed like a fun thing to do, drive up to the airport and pick people up. So no, I don't think either of us. I actually thought for the whole day that his name was Rob, but his name is actually Chris, which he finally corrected me on at the end of the day. But long story short, we have been married for almost 17 years now. So that's how so we lived in Oklahoma, and then in 2016, similar to Lucy, we moved to Nashville. So I've been in Nashville a similar length of time as Lucy. And I just cut out a bunch of stuff.
Why did you move here? Why did you move to Nashville?
So I worked for the planning departments in Oklahoma, Broken Arrow, which is a suburb of Tulsa, and then for Oklahoma City. And once my kids were both of school age, I had always said I want to go back to full-time work in the public sector planning department. And so this Nashville, the jobs I applied for were both in Tennessee, Nashville and Chattanooga. And Nashville, I just knew a lot about from hearing about its growth. And at that point, 2016, there was a lot in the press about it being the IT city. And I just thought, if I'm going to hit this planning stuff full time, I want to be somewhere where the best challenges and opportunities in the planning world are open to me. And so Nashville seemed to make sense. And so we've been here since 2016 and really enjoy it, and enjoy particularly the opportunities for my children that weren't there in Oklahoma, the cultural and just diversity and opportunities of living in a big city that we didn't have out there.
Okay, well, just as an asterisk, my wife is from Oklahoma City. Her parents live in Guthrie, and one of her sisters lives in Tulsa. So I could go to Oklahoma City, probably not as much as my wife wants me to, but I do go out there. So anyway, I've been to the Will Rogers Airport many times, but nobody picks me up with a sign from Kentucky. So I'm just letting you know. All right, so let's go on. So now that we know who you all are, Ann, I'm going to start with you. Your responsibilities at the planning department, particularly pursuant to what we're talking about today, the East River. You're the project manager for the East River. So tell people who, including me, who don't fully understand what that means. What does that mean? What are you doing? And then Lucy, you can chime in, but what is your role? What do you do?
Yeah, so it's a very big role. It's really exciting work, planning work. We have this opportunity on the East Bank to really take a long range look at how that part of our downtown East Nashville, people are kind of define it both ways, what that becomes in the future. So I have been living and breathing the East Bank for probably the past year. My role is to work with the other planning staff and staff with NDOT, our transportation planners, and Metro Water, Metro Parks, all of the metro agencies, along with a consulting group that we've hired to help us do a lot of the technical analysis needed to really shape a vision and a plan for the next 10 to 50 plus years. Probably a lot of what we're dreaming of and visioning at the moment may not come to fruition for another 10 to 50 years. It could be anywhere in that range. And so I get to have a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions. The East Bank is really a unique opportunity in Nashville because it's a large area. It's 338 acres. And just if anyone's not familiar, the boundaries are from Jefferson Street south to where I-24 comes over the river. And then using I-24 as the eastern boundary. So we're south of River North and where Oracle and Topgolf are located. Within the central part of the East Bank is the Titans Stadium. And they have, the Titans have a vision and ideas for how the area around their stadium should change and develop over time. And so I'm working with a lot of the property owners and folks that are interested in doing something new and different on the East Bank and planning out the engagement strategies and managing the website and kind of overseeing all of the project to ensure that we're on track and producing a great plan for the city.
Vice
Okay, so
Mayor, I
how
would
does-
just add,
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I would just add that, I mentioned early on that part of my role is, and I think our role at the planning department is to really enhance those character defining features that make the city distinct. And one of those is the river. And I think after decades of decline and disinterest, our city really started to embrace the river with Ascend, and there are some other projects. So again, we're building on work that has been happening here, homegrown in Nashville over the last 10 or 15 years. But I think that using the riverfront as a centerpiece of our city, making sure that people have equitable access to it through parks and greenways and multimodal access to the East Bank is really critical. And the opportunity there is we've had a lot of discussions around transportation planning and mobility over the last 10 or 15 years. We're having to go in and sort of retrofit existing neighborhoods, and that's really difficult. Retrofit existing streets. On the East Bank, we do have an opportunity to invite people to access that area in a lot of different modes and to design the system from the ground up. And so we're having to start with the East Bank in a way that we don't typically have to begin. And what's interesting is we had begun the East Bank work when the explosion happened across the river on 2nd Avenue. And so as horrific as that was for our city and our community, as much as we were injured, right at the birthplace, this is all of the birthplace where sort of modern Nashville in the 1800s grew up. So we have an opportunity now, though, to try to imagine these riverbanks together and in a thoughtful way. And so that's part of the challenge, I think, that has emerged as we've begun to investigate this area. But a city that's changing as dynamically as we are has to hold on to those kind of formative pieces. And so I think that that's a lot of what the East Bank is about. And so I'm happy to talk with Anna in more detail what we're trying to accomplish. But to me, the root of it is to do something that is very much at the heart of this city and who we are and for Nashvillians.
Okay, so let me ask you a question, and I'll mention that Councilmember John Rutherford has gotten on, and he gets on all our conversations. And I have to apologize to him because I saw him the other day, and he had a mask on, and he had a hat that said BNA on it, and I saw him from a distance, and I thought it was Councilmember Russ Bradford because Russ is in the airport is in his district, so I didn't even see him, and I called him Russ, and then I took a better look, and it's like, no, that's John. So anyway. So Councilmember Rutherford, always on these calls, great listener, great participant, and a really good council member. So let me ask you this, follow up on that last question or the last statement that you made. So I know where Fort Nashboro is, okay? And you see it up on First Avenue. And then you look, if you're standing, in front of the Titan Stadium looking at the river and you look at First Avenue, most of the buildings don't face towards the river. They were built as warehouses so that people could come in, unload, and then distribute out probably on Second Avenue. All right, understanding the historical importance of this area, that was one of the questions that came through this week was, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with it in a way so that, you don't, all of a sudden we don't open it up, and the next thing we know, we have 8,000 restaurants all looking on the river, and we've completely forgotten the historical significance of what that river was and what that area meant to the city. How do you do it in a way where you do protect the historical nature of that area? And Anna, I'll start with you, or Lucy, or you can fight over who goes first.
Well, Anna's been a little less involved on the Second Avenue piece, although she's looking, I think, at both riverfronts. So I'll start. And I want to say I'm so pleased to see Cyril Stewart here on the call, who is chairing a task force to help, provide input and guidance on the how we're thinking, at least on the west side of the riverbank. Although I think you could apply the lessons for both sides, right? I think that, we've been holding a lot of community conversations around both the East Bank and the West Bank. A lot of them are sort of overlapping in terms of who's attending. And so it's been really interesting. And I do think that that what I'm hearing from residents and folks who are really invested in this area, a lot of longtime Nashvillians who were sort of living and working on Second Avenue as it's the first downtown neighborhood, that there is an interest in having the buildings on Second and any new buildings that we create on the east side of the river to engage the river in a new way. And so maybe not turn our backs on the river to the extent that perhaps, they were on Second before the explosion. But I don't think you have to sort of give up your history to engage the river, to create more outdoor dining spaces and to do things that bring the public there. And I think there are a lot of interpretive ideas for bringing the history alive. Like if you look at the ULI Urban Land Institute report on Second Avenue, they had a lot of ideas about how to bring art, historical interpretation, all of those kinds of elements in the rebuilding process. And so I think if you do that and you layer that opportunity, it's really important. I think on the East Bank, it's a little bit different because you don't have sort of historic fabric to the same way if you're talking about buildings as you do on the other side, but the opportunity and the necessity to respond to the other side of the river is equal. Anna, I don't know, have you had a lot of conversations on the East Bank related to historic assets, or how has that been? How would you say that's evolving?
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot about the history of the river itself and the fact that it's been a working river really since the birth of Nashville. So learned a lot about how that is a pathway of commerce. and the barge drops that they used to do, where you can now drop in your kayaks in front of the bridge building. And so, you know, a lot about those industry, it's really been an industrial part of our city. There were a few neighborhoods on there in the past, but it's really been very industrial. And the bridges, the bridge structures that we have, particularly the older ones, have really been a function for connecting East and West Banks. And so I do think that there is that industrial kind of gritty bridge character to the East Bank that I think we would love to include as we move forward in how we design things. And having grown up in England, where there's not space to spread out like cities can in America. So very often you do have new things being built on or in or next to old things. And so how you do that well is something I've seen good and bad examples of growing up in England. So I bring that kind of perspective to the conversation as well.
All right, so let me ask you a question, Anna. So on this call over the last year or so, we've had some Nashville historians get on, Carol Busey being one, Jim Hubler, some other folks who have gotten on. And those are the ones that end up with the most questions, because I think they're, well, for two reasons. One, it's fascinating to listen to some of these stories. And two, I think there's a sense of wanting to save that history, not losing it. We don't have a Sherwood Forest, but we do have a river, okay? One of the things that I also think we've talked about on these calls is, you know, if you walk around downtown, like around the Capitol and I guess Dedrick Street, you see a lot of tourists that have somehow realized that they don't have to get on a pedal tavern at 10 o'clock in the morning. They actually can walk up and look at some of the historic stuff that or look at the Capitol or look at Bicentennial Mall or whatever. But you see them walking around, whether they're on John Lewis Way in front of the old Woolworths or in front of the Hermitage Hotel, where there was so much history that was created. And we've talked on this program about how we need to preserve that history and make sure that that a lot of very significant things happened in this city, that some people, if they're not paying attention and they're just looking for the Capitol, they'll walk right over it and not know that history was made on that site. So take the river now. I don't know all the history behind it. I know I look at, you know, First and Second Avenue and go, there must be so much stuff that happened there. I don't know what happened on the east side of the river, the area that you're talking about. So again, how do you go back and find people who do know, so that when you come up with an overall plan, you're incorporating that as part of the overall structure?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned Dr. Busey at the beginning there, because she came and gave us a walking tour of the East Bank and East Nashville. And yeah, she's just a wealth of knowledge. I think, you know, you could just spend all day with her and she just knows so much. So yeah, that was really the beginning point of our planning study, was to understand the history of what occurred on the East Bank. And a lot of it is to do with barge construction and kind of movement of goods from the East Bank. And then also previous to the interstate construction, historic Edgefields boundaries would have come on to what is now we're calling the East Bank study area. So looking back at some of the neighborhoods that existed on the East Bank and the street grid that existed before the interstate and before some of the bridges were constructed is really important for beginning to think about how you knit an urban fabric back onto the East Bank. And so looking at where Russell and other streets, kind of Fartherland, Basketball, how they came through what the interstate has interrupted, and how we might think about those streets on the East Bank today. And so those are really important things. And I think not just to replicate what was there before, but to really consider both the new and the old of Nashville, and taking the best of both of those things and creating that fabric on the East Bank, because we really have an opportunity to create some new neighborhoods here that is not an opportunity we typically get in our large planning studies. We're often looking at parts of our city that already have a fabric there, and we're looking at ways to either address density or traffic and mobility concerns, but not to the scale that we have on the East Bank. 338 acres, it's 1.7 miles of shoreline. And then you think about the redevelopment at Casey and the redevelopment at River North and Oracle, that's a whole area that you could live, work, play, move around in, hopefully through walking on greenways or biking, and not have to rely on the car to get from one part of the East Bank to another. So Lucy may have some other things to add on that, but that's my response to that one.
Anna, I thought that was an exceptional answer. And I would only say that any one of the properties in the study area could develop on its own at any point, just as you see happening all over the city. And so here we have an opportunity to organize the development in a way that is more thoughtful and more cohesive. And so, we're not creating growth here. This is actually a deep growth management approach that we're doing here, in addition to what Anna said. So.
Okay, so Lucy, this next question is to you. It's actually a two-part question. So it's a development of this entire thing. For the first question is, how much of this land does Metro actually own? And then I'll ask you the second question.
Because so it's about.
Yeah, we don't.
So it's about no, but what's more important than what we own is, or as important, that what we own is important, but what's as important is the public framework that serves, whether you're public, facility or property or a private one. We still need greenways, public streets that are designed for all modes of transportation, sewers and utilities, the sort of things that aren't particularly exciting, but are what it means to give a high quality of life. And so to me, that's what we're focusing on, is that public infrastructure and ensuring that it is knitted together in a way that makes sense, be you a private property owner or a public property owner, or, or a visitor, right? And so that's really the piece that we're looking at. And one thing I would say, that is incumbent on us all is to have an equitable approach to planning. And what planning for equity means to me is you build a very, very sturdy and basic foundation at the beginning of a planning study, and it grows. So the first principle, that's, again, we're just really basic here, is that the greenways that access the water are public, that we are building in places that enhance environmental sustainability and resiliency. Those are fundamental sort of questions about how we care for a city and a place. And then you say, we want to understand the kinds of uses here that we think are appropriate. A housing strategy is critical, right? So you're starting with a basic standard that says we need to have housing here because we are falling short in this city on housing development. That's a very basic principle. And so we're starting at this place to try to organize our thinking for the East Bank, if that sort of makes sense. And through that, and through those decisions, then you can guide development with the partnership of our council members who ultimately make many of these decisions to ensure that everybody is sort of responding to the same public framework and the same values. So this is a real kind of public private, it's not a partnership, but it's a kind of a different way of thinking, the things the public need to put on the table when an area like this is developing, and how the private sector comes in, later on in the process, maybe, and we come together, if that makes sense. I didn't answer your question.
No, you did.
I went off into Mars on that one. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. I'll bring you down to earth. Okay, so this is a question for both of you, and I knew it was coming, and then Mike Hodge just chimed in, and so the question is relevant. And Avi Poster had sent the same message in before, and that is, okay, so you've got this area, some owned by the city, some not owned, but you've got a chance to do something that's pretty remarkable. But remarkable is can be defined many different ways. Okay, so we're in a city that is booming and exploding. But I just came from a discussion at Pastor Fuzz, who has this regular breakfast every so often. And this time what he did was he talked about, he asked people at the meeting to write down the one thing that was the most important thing that they had on their mind at this point that was important to the city of Nashville. And there were a host of different things, but one of them was development, overdevelopment, and one was affordability. I will say that the common theme, I think, of all the answers that came in, and there were like 20, 25, really, if you get down to it, were about quality of life and people. And it wasn't like we need to build more really giant $2 million condos everywhere so that, people have these wonderful, great views of the city to look at. They were all focused on people who might need assistance, might need some help at some point. It was all about people. So how do you take that into consideration on something like this? Because I know it's important. We could say, oh, well, let's just turn it all over to private development, and they're going to build skyscrapers looking at the river, and they're going to charge, $800 million for each unit. How do we make sure that we do this right? You talk about equitable and things like that, affordability, affordable housing, access to those areas for everybody, so everybody can enjoy it. How do you do that? And I see, okay, here's Lucy first, and then I'm going to hand it. Yeah, I was just waiting to see which one took their.
Well, I think, Anna, one thing I can speak to, and this is just a general statement outside the East Bank, and then I'm sure Anna will be able to fill in. I was really pleased that council approved 2 new positions for the planning department, including a senior position for housing. And a really important part of that is, of course, affordable housing. And so the goal there is to have somebody at a senior level position within the department to be able to help impact all of our decisions. Now, as you know, we do have some constraints from the state on that, but that doesn't mean that we are without tools. And so part of the goal that we are going to have with the 2 hires is to ensure that we have a robust housing plan that is a unified housing plan. So we have a new director at MDHA who I don't think has formally been, it's been in the public, so I don't, but my goal would be to ensure that we are bringing to bear all of our resources, both, private sector, as well as not-for-profit, for-profit community, and MDHA should be part of that table, as well as Metro, in the execution of a housing plan. And that would include housing preservation, that would include steps to address gentrification and the like. And each of those groups are going to have different tools, if you will. I think Metro standard, and one we have to meet, and actually affordable housing, I would say, Anna, was probably one of the biggest comments that we've received so far in the community meetings. And so again, I think planning is a layered exercise. And so where we are right now is more in the site organization and making sure that we're creating equitable mobility networks, for example, which you kind of, that's a foundational question when you're developing a site, right? And so I think that those are those pieces, and then saying that we want housing plans throughout the East Bank that include a diversity of housing types and the like as a basic principle is something that we're going to be, pushing. Inclusionary housing, I see some questions in the chat, is something that the state has prohibited as part of a zoning process, but there are other ways to work with, the private sector who are, developing projects to ensure that there's a mix of housing, and we're committed to pushing that.
Okay. So before I go to Anna, let me ask you this. So obviously we're restricted by certain state laws. Okay, I get that. But if Metro owned the property and Metro was the landlord, we can do, I assume, what we want. We're the owner of the building. So if we want, if we want it to be affordable and we want it to stay affordable, we can do that, correct?
Sure, and you've seen Metro enter into agreements with Metro-owned property. We had an agreement with Elmington from, I think, 2015 and 16, where we acquired land. And so that was sort of a public-private partnership. So I think that there are, when we're the owners, there are opportunities. And then certainly, Envision Casey is sort of located in a way that is really critical. And it's important to ensure that the residents that are part of that community and the surrounding neighborhood have access to amenities in and around their neighborhood, but also any that we built on the East Bank, such as grocery stores, things like that. So I think that, to your question, yes, the toolbox changes depending on the ownership and the levers.
Yeah. All right. So Anna, I'm going to you. So these are, and we only have 8 minutes left. And the sign of a really good interview is when I look up and it's like, oh no, I'm running out of time and I got a lot more questions. So Anna, to build on what Lucy said, and that is, I'll ask it maybe in a different way. So we want people to be able to live and afford to live in this city, okay? We want to be able to pull this off. But it's in the implementation. I mean, you can design and we can talk about it all we want, but we have to implement. So how do you actually make this happen? I know we're in the beginning stages, and maybe in the answer to your question, you can also say, if people want to have input, how do they do that? But in the end, we want this to happen. So how do we make it happen so we don't look up 20 years from now, it's like, oh, we have 8 million condos on the riverfront. Well, that wasn't exactly what we wanted. How do we make sure that this happens?
Yeah, and I'll start with the input piece of this, because public engagement is kind of my favorite thing to do as a planner, and thinking about how different engagement strategies is really important. So I want to make sure before we run out of time that everybody knows that you can go to our website, eastbankstudy.nashville.gov. On there, you will be able to sign up for email updates. So we send out regular email updates on the study and our upcoming public engagements. You can also view the previous presentations that we've done on this. Through COVID, we've been trying different things to engage people. So we started off with a couple of large virtual community meetings. And then the week on July 14th and 15th, we held in-person public workshops at the Bridge Building on the East Bank with interactive stations that you could go to where we ask questions about authenticity and what makes Nashville, what's authentic to Nashville, and programming of public spaces, and how would you spend your dollars on public spaces on the East Bank. So I want to make sure everyone knows about the website and signing up for the email updates, because we hopefully will be doing more rounds of public engagement the week of August 30th. And so we're shaping up to offer that in person. but we're also trying to be cognizant of, as you talked about at the beginning, the rising COVID numbers. And so some of this may have to shift more to an online format, and that is different, but it's not. It's also reaches sometimes a wider audience. So if you live, far from the East Bank, but the East Bank is a very important component of our entire city, it can be easier to join an online meeting or complete an online survey than to have to drive to the East Bank. So please sign up, please view our website. We definitely, in all of our public outreach, hear loud and clear the concern about equity, the concern about this being the East Bank becoming a place that local Nashvillians enjoy coming to, more so than they currently do coming to other parts of our downtown. And so we can shape some of those things through our land use policy and through the zoning. We can shape the types of uses, the heights, the design of buildings, where the taller buildings go versus the lower scale buildings. And then the affordability component is always very complex, but we have on our consulting group these wonderful economic advisors who are giving us suggestions of other cities. What are other cities doing that are within a similar state government framework, and how they are tackling affordable housing. And so we're going to be able to take from the best around the country and see what could work in Nashville. And you're moving around, so I'm going to.
I'm moving around because I'm trying to do two things at the same time. All right. So if people really do want to get engaged, they have to. They need to look at the website. They need to get in touch with the planning department, and then they need to be specifically engaged in what's going on. And that's the best way to do it. I've got like 2 minutes left. Tell me the process. Tell me, not the process, but how long is this going to take? And we got some responses that basically said, let's get a move on it. Because I do worry, and I think the people watching and many people in the city worry that, again, I drive downtown, I'll drive downtown next week, and some new building will have popped up out of the ground. This is really important to a lot of people. This city is moving very quickly, as you know. How do we make sure that everything is protected and that we actually can come up with a plan? And how long is that going to take? And either one.
Let me take a stab here and say that I feel that incredible sense of urgency that you just described to make sure that we get this right, to make sure that we have the pieces and the foundation in place to support development that we can be proud of as a city. And the situation on 2nd and the riverfront has almost made that sense of urgency more acute, because I think it is so critical that we rebuild where we experience this explosion in a way that is exceptional, and to rebuild and reclaim that space as ours. And so, when you're recovering from a blast and you're in a state of recovery, I think, and again, I'm kind of focused on the West for just a moment, we're looking ahead and saying, what is it that we want there? Because it would be so easy to focus on the buildings that are damaged or the work that needs to be done just to clear away debris. But I think we have to fix our eye on what it is that we want and then pursue that really vigorously. The East Bank is a little different because we're not in a recovery effort, but we are no less kind of feeling a sense of urgency and pressure to ensure that we are getting in front of development, again, that could happen at any one of these areas at any time in Nashville. You can ask for redevelopment under your existing zoning or ask for new zoning. And so it's really incumbent on the city to get in front of that and try to make sure that it happens in a thoughtful way that will make us all proud. And so, Anna, just let me say, We aren't rezoning at planning this first look that we're doing at the site. This isn't rezoning, right? That's up to council. And so any rezoning proposals, as with any area in the city, would have to come to planning and then go to council for rezoning. The first step that we're doing today is this assessment of where is it appropriate to build? Really appropriate, given the flooding risks and the environmental sustainability issues. Where is it appropriate to build? And how do you build in a way that supports the needs of lots of different people? That's the multimodal component of it. That's sort of the framework. That's what we're asking before we entertain rezonings, if that makes sense. We're trying to set a framework, set a foundation, and then you can entertain development proposals. Anna, did I say anything there that you didn't agree with? So it's going to happen in pieces and in iterations because of the complexity.
Well, so Karen Dunlap sent a question in, and she has property north of, or she was talking about property north of Topgolf, which is outside of this area you're talking about. But the idea is, how do we protect it all? So, and I think you just answered it, because council members do have to get involved along with the city, and we have to figure out how to make this work before we look up and it's like, whoop, none of that worked, because somebody took advantage of the zoning and it became something else. Sounds like we got a lot of work to do. Councilmember Rutherford, I saw that he had sent a message in, and he said this was a very, very good conversation, and that all council members should be required to watch it. So we may make them do that, or try to anyway. We are out of time. I think we may need to have you back. We've got people that we do invite back, because this one, I think, is very relevant and very important to the city as a whole. And I think we need to keep talking about it. And Lucy's screen went dark because I think her family was coming in the back door, or somebody was. Anyway, thank you both for being on. I'm going to go look at Nottingham and figure out how to get there, because that has now gone onto my bucket list. But I'll talk to you, Anna, before I go, to make sure I don't miss anything. So I can
Please do. I'll tell you the best pubs.
All right, thank you. And Lucy, you're welcome to come with me if you want. We'll go explore Nottingham together. Okay.
Vice Mayor, I just wanted to say thank you for leading the city through these kinds of conversations. And I really appreciate you and your leadership on these issues. So really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for being on. This was really, really interesting. I appreciate what you all do. I can't, you all have difficult assignments, and I know there's lots of different opinions on this, and you do both an exceptional job of keeping it together and getting us just moving forward. This one's a big one. So we're all in this one together. Anyway, thank you. Everybody have a great weekend. Be safe. Those numbers are going up. We're not kidding. Be very, very safe. Encourage people to get vaccinated. Somebody's saying, watch, my daughter has a show tonight on Hallmark. It's coming up for the chat. So you're all welcome to watch that. I won't use this as a plug for her, even though I did anyway. Thank you both. Enjoy your weekend. Vivian Wilhoit, the property assessor, will be on next week. She's going to talk about how much that value of that property is down on the east side of the river. Anyway, thanks everybody, and we'll see everybody next week. All right, bye.